welcome to our latest Onward panel event. I'm Sebastian Payne, Director of Onward, and we're here to talk about something that is very close to Onward's heart and also, I think, the heart of everyone who's here in our room in Westminster today. We are talking about bridging the gap between research and practice, and life sciences is something that is going to be very valuable, it is already very valuable, to the future of the UK economy, and it's absolutely crucial to our science superpower ambitions. And at Onward, we run our excellent Science Superpower programme that looks just at this. So we're delighted to be doing this event with our friends at LifeArc to be examining this. And I think we all know that there are many great fresh ideas across the UK in the science and tech sector, but we still struggle with trying to convert them into practical inventions that can grow into full businesses. And that is what we are here to talk about today. So we're looking at that translation mindset from the very beginning to make sure that we've got enough funding for that level, and also the early stage investment is in the right place. And to do just that, we have a very illustrious panel. To my right, we have a man who everyone in this room knows, which is George Freeman, who is the Minister for Science, Technology and Research, a great friend of Onward, and someone who I think we can all agree is very much on the forefront of our science superpower ambitions. We're delighted to welcome George here today. On my left, we have Beth Stanton, who is Deputy Editor of Working Careers at the Financial Times, who's also written about public policy and education, and also had to work with me for quite a long time as well in my previous incarnation, and yet we managed to entice her back today. On my right, we also have Melanie Lee, who's CEO of LifeArc, and aside from her current role, she's had a 30-year career in healthcare R&D, has gained leadership experience in the biopharmaceutical and medtech industries. And on my left, we have Professor Charles Bruter, who is Pro-Vice Chancellor for Innovation at the University of Oxford, and has got a very illustrious academic career that I'm sure you may be discussing in your remarks. So we'll begin this event with some opening thoughts from each of our panellists before we have a discussion, and then open it out to people in the room to ask questions. So George, would you like to kick us off with giving us your thoughts on how we can deal with this lost in translation problem?
Thank you, Seb. And can I just first of all thank Onward for putting this together. Good politics needs good think tanks, and the most difficult issues that we're gripping in terms of public policy really need think tanks to bring together people in non-partisan forums and do the cutting-edge thinking that is quite often quite hard, actually, in the 24/7 febrile world of modern government. So this is a really important conversation. I'm really grateful to Onward for the work you're doing more broadly on my portfolio on the science and technology agenda, but this one particularly in terms of the life science and medtech and health tech piece. Let me just try and sort of frame, I think, the conversation in terms of where I'm coming at it from, but there'll be lots of perspectives in the room. I think you know, and colleagues in the room may not know, but my career background before coming into government 13 years ago was in this sector, 3 phases, 4.5 years in the 90s doing pretty aggressive funding of early stage biomed venture capital, 9 companies in 3 years in the sort of 1990s when the stock markets were open and there was money available. And lots of lessons from that period, but worked all around the country. We spun out companies from Glasgow, Edinburgh, Manchester, Leicester, London universities, weirdly not Cambridge, funnily enough. And then 4 years running our last big startup, which was an AI toxicology prediction and drug discovery company, and then became an outspoken advocate for a rather different model of biomedical research in the UK, in which we really need to bring hospital, university and industry much more closely together and create deep translational research environments. And I mean translational, and defined our little consultancy business around the notion not of just bench to bedside, which is the sort of traditional, rather crude model, but actually a more iterative 3-way feedback loop where the patients in the hospital, the plastic door into the laboratory, and the industrial partners working together, it's 3-way and iterative, and essentially shifting from an old paradigm in which you do deep biological target research and validation, and then you go through into pre-clin development, and then you go over the wall into traditional phase 1, 2, 3, 4, And drugs in the old model took sort of 15 years, $2 billion, and 80% failed. And the industry chasing a bell curve of no impact, some impact, better impact, optimal impact, less impact, side effects, hair loss, and death. And every drug has a curve like that, and the industry spends billions, literally billions, identifying the people on the edges that you don't want to give the drug to and trying to find the sweet spot. And my argument was that actually the revolution in genomics, the revolution in informatics, combined will allow us to totally change the model of drug discovery, but also actually more broadly then the model of prevention, because you can start to understand which patient groups the drug that you were designing for everybody actually really works for. And if you start with them, and guess what? If they're patients who haven't got a cure, they'll volunteer very fast to be part of an ongoing iterative process, as long as it's properly regulated, of deep translational research. So back in that original life science industrial strategy with David Cameron 10, 11 years ago, we set out that vision that the UK shouldn't be in the business of really trying to prop up yesterday's old model. We should allow industries to adapt, allow the pharma industry to adapt. We need to create the ecosystem through deep investment in genomics, deep investment in informatics, deep investment in the NHS as a research engine, so that the UK becomes the best place in the world to come and do this model of deep translational research. Brackets, because we're never going to be the best price payer, the highest price payer for drugs. And I've always tried to be quite explicit about that, because in the NHS there's a fear that this whole revolution, George, is going to unlock huge costs the system can't bear. Well, my argument is we need to be very explicit. We need to pay a fair price. But once we're clear that price isn't the thing that we are attracting people here with, we'd better set out a very compelling other proposition. So it focuses everyone on that. So I just make that introductory remark because I think that is still the mission and still the opportunity. And unpacking that and how we do it. And there are some institutes in the country who do it brilliantly. And I cite one that I know well, Charlie Craddock in Birmingham, in blood cancer. He's brought in about 300, 400 million pounds worth of free drugs for NHS patients, driven protocols in blood cancer. And when I was last out of government, I went to help him set up a patient-owned contract research organisation in blood cancer. So the patients come together and say to industry, we're here, we'd like to work with you. And I think there's a whole revolution coming through genomics and informatics that empowers the patients, finally, and that puts charities and patients at the heart of working with industry to find the new drugs. And I think the big adaptation for us across the board is to create the framework in which new procurement pathways, new NICE pathways are driven by patient demand, patient data, the digital revolution capturing data and making it possible to find cures for rare diseases, but also start to track which patients respond best to which drugs. So I think that's the sort of broader context of where we're going. And two particular just policy points. Doing that level of change across a whole system is really hard. So my second sort of instinct and urge is that we pick some areas, both disease areas and places, where you develop best practice. And that's why we set out these missions in the latest life science strategy. And the idea is these are chronic disease focused. So they can't be dismissed as sort of irrelevant to the NHS. They're literally trying to get to the heart of the cost burdens that are overwhelming the system. And they're pathfinders for the most advanced research, the most advanced digital interaction, and to help light the runway through into how we pull these innovations through into the system. My last point is one of the reasons that the NHS has been such a brilliant sort of tool for public health and for broad health research, and the NIH are 1.3 billion a year, research institutes embedded in the NHS, the pandemic demonstrated the power of all that, but not such a good adopter of innovation, is that it's a complex series of problems, but it's not one organisation, it's more like 470. The incentives are aligned in all sorts of different ways. We still reward hospitals on being busy and full. We don't properly incentivise prevention. There's all sorts of progress being made. The integrated care boards are shifting. But I think the big challenge is signal, market signal. And at the moment, if you develop a brilliant innovation and there are many brilliant innovations being developed, we haven't really created a pull-through into the NHS. And there are many inspired clinicians, hospital managers, doctors, nurses who want to pull innovation through, but to change a care pathway in any hospital, in any system, is really hard. And I think for me, that's the big public policy challenge, is how do we create not just a pilot, we're really good at pilots. How do we create these new market signals, if I can call it that? And I don't mean privatization, I mean signals in the NHS, so that when we see an innovation that is saving money or saving lives or both, we can accelerate it through. And I think that's where the real challenge for us is. And we have some regulatory freedoms, whether you voted for them or not, post-Brexit. And I'm desperately keen that we use them to create the lit runway for tomorrow's immunotherapies, for tomorrow's medtech, for tomorrow's devices. We, around the world, this is where the whole sector's heading. Can we prevent? Can we track? Can we test better? Can we build these partnerships? We've got the opportunity here to do it. I think we need to grip it, and there's going to be some architectural work up in where the NHS meets industry, which I think is where the debate really sits now.
Definitely. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much, George. Charles, would you like to start with your opening remarks?
Well, I'm going to go home and tell my grandson I sat on a stage with Mick Jagger. So
Mick Jagger of science, obviously.
absolutely. So
I must have missed the joke. I've never been likened
It was
to Mick
it was
Jagger.
your photo entrance.
Oh, I see. Right.
So I apologise. I work in Oxford, so my view is an academic Oxford University type perspective, etc. So what I'll do is I'll just share with you some of the things we've been doing in Oxford, and I'll share with you some of the things that I'm worrying about now in terms of gaps and opportunities, etc. So I think the first thing I would say, of course, is we're lucky in Oxford. We have some amazing talent. Students, researchers, faculty, etc. They, of course, come up with great ideas. We've also now in Oxford got a number of role models. So, for example, Matthew Wood, who Joe used to work with, he's on his 4th company. And that's very different to the Oxford when I first went there in the mid-'80s, etc. So we've got role models, and many students and researchers and faculty are looking at these individuals and thinking, well, if they can do it, then we can do it. So Oxford is changing very rapidly. There is a massive culture change. I get many students and researchers coming to me and say, look, I don't want a traditional career in Oxford anymore. I don't want to do a PPE degree and then go and work in Goldman Sachs and then become the next chancellor, etc. What I want is I care about some of the problems across the planet, and I want to devote my life tackling those problems. So I want you to teach me how to be a leader, how to write a business plan, how to innovate, how to be an entrepreneur, how to raise funds, etc. So that's the culture change that we're going through in Oxford at the moment. The other great thing about Oxford is that close by, we've got an amazing national infrastructure at Harwell and Cullen, massive resources. And of course, just by proximity, we should be the biggest beneficiary. I'm not sure we are, but I think we should be, etc. That's fantastic. The other thing I would say is that as a university, so the figure for 2021 was we had 875 million of research funding. That was more than any other university in the country, and it was different to number 2 by 170 million. So it's not a small difference, it's a big difference. We've got researchers working on problems that we all worry about. So in healthcare, of course, I worry about dementia and aging and mental health and rare diseases and cancer and diabetes and AMR, et cetera, et cetera. But, frankly, the challenges that we're facing around climate emergency are a magnitude worse. But they all impact healthcare. Global warming, pollution of land, air, water. It's affecting our access to food. It's our access to sort of clean water, etc. Because of the climate emergency, we're going to see massive changes in the incidence of infectious diseases. Some parts of the planet are going to become uninhabitable. We're going to see migration on a massive scale. And associated with that, we're going to see, I think, an explosion in mental health. You know, I was worried about mental health before the pandemic. I worry about it more post the pandemic. And I think in the next few decades, there's going to be an even greater increase. And we're not making fast enough progress in coming up with new treatments for some of those conditions, etc. If I think of things like sort of the inequality and the impact of technology on society, when social media was being developed 20 years ago, I had no idea that this was going to be used to undermine democracies and it would have such a negative impact on the mental health of young kids. And now with the AI revolution, you know, which is going to affect all four corners of our planet, everything we do, it's going to affect it. A lot of people have no idea the impact it's going to have and the speed with which it's going to happen, etc. And I know some people are getting quite stressed about it already, etc. So those are some of the things. I think the other thing that we have done in Oxford, which I think has been transformative, frankly, is 7 years ago we set up this fund called Oxford Science Innovation. It's now called Oxford Science Enterprise. Before we set that up in 2015, we were creating maybe 4 or 5 companies a year. We're now producing regularly more than 20. In 2021, as a university, we did 31 companies. That was more than any university on the planet. It was more than MIT and Stanford. And that particular year, as a university, our companies pulled in 1.4 billion of venture capital funding. That was more than the VC money coming into the rest of the country. So those were stunning figures. So that's the past. So what am I worrying about now? Frankly, we need many more investors. We don't have enough funding to do the things we want. Well, I'm trying to attract more corporates into Oxford. We desperately need more scale-up entrepreneurs. I'm confident we can create companies, but we need individuals who can take those companies and make them 10, 30, 50, 100 billion, because that's when they really have an impact and they change society and they create lots of jobs, etc. We're also worrying about creating more innovation space. We're putting a lot of effort in trying to encourage a lot more female entrepreneurship. So more female founders, more female C-suite, etc. So those are some of the things that I'm currently working on. I'm also trying to build closer relations with the local community and the local politicians, because as Oxford grows, and it's going to, I don't want it to have the problems that San Francisco's got now. So that's what I had to say, Sebastian.
Thank you very much. Bethan.
Thanks, Seb. So I'd echo some of the things that Chaz has mentioned about the increase in interest in starting innovative projects, in making tech transferable. It's something I've really seen and that people talk about within universities, that there has been a big culture shift. And the reasons for that are many. I think one of them is a change in the priorities of universities, and universities looking at more ways to bring research kind of down from the ivory tower, so to speak. Some of it is culture change, looking at the States and other places and seeing, you know, this is something we can do in the UK. So I think some of the kind of doom mongering about, you know, where's the UK Silicon Valley is sometimes a little bit misplaced. We're in a different spot, we're in a different stage of development. One of the things that I've looked at particularly in this area is the issue of equity stakes and the sort of stakes that universities retain in spin-outs. Lots of you will be familiar with this, but I'll just kind of go over the debate very briefly. There are some founders who think that there's too much kind of stake retained by universities, and that acts as a drag on a company's development. It puts off investors, perhaps dissuades people from kind of starting out anyway, and takes resources from companies as they're growing. Many of those things are debatable. On the university side, the kind of argument is that there is so much investment that's placed in these companies before they get to the spinning out stage, as you kind of outlined, Chaz. We're talking about technology which has been in development for years, in some case decades, with often a great deal of public funding. and kind of long-term thinking through universities. And that ecosystem needs to be kind of funded and supported through perhaps stakes retained in companies. Whether that actually can be a money spinner for universities is also up for debate, and there's not so much evidence on that, but that could be something we'll talk about at a different stage. I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this kind of tech transfer question is something of a red herring. When we think about the real challenges for companies when they're spinning out, as you mentioned, lab space, talent, early investment, they're the things that kind of really come up. And I think there's a danger when we look at the sort of equity stake question that we end up focusing on something that kind of seems a bit easy to fix, but actually isn't going to make that big a difference. But the reason I think it's an interesting question is because it really highlights that the technology underpinning these potentially commercially successful and world-changing businesses and projects is technology that has been developed over many, many, many years with often public money, and we kind of need to recognize that side of the spin-out sort of tech transfer journey as well. And it raises really difficult questions about, how does this get recompensed? How does it get funded? Also, I would argue that anyway, the kind of end goal of research is not always commercialization, and it's the same with higher education. But what the story of many of these spin-outs show is that the technology, doesn't come to market, doesn't get to that point without beginning as ideas which are kind of really blue sky and don't have obvious commercial viability, that we need to be really investing in early stage technology and research and thinking holistically about the system at all stages and how that gets funded. Early stage research can't be precarious. It needs to be kind of properly backed up, and whether we get that right will have a knock-on impact as to whether it works at a much later stage and when it comes to market. So that would be my beginning point.
Thank you very much, Beth. And finally, Melanie.
Thank you. So, morning, everybody. So I'm going to come down to a very practical example of how I think we're going to, one part of helping translation. And so I'm the CEO of LifeArc, and I came to LifeArc as a not-for-profit. It came out of Medical Research Council technology, and it managed to have a life of its own on the back of a royalty stream that we got from having humanized the Keytruda antibody, or what subsequently became Keytruda antibody. So my career spanned academia through industry, big and small, pharma, medtech, but always working alongside with charities. So I understood the full spectrum of sectors. And what we're doing with LifeArc to take it into being a real substantial resource for the UK is we're positioning ourselves from the really excellent research base we have, and we're aligning ourselves with partners, many MRC funded, but funded from wherever academics manage to get their money. And we're actually looking at what are those rich themes of research that we should be capitalising on, because I do believe that one can boil the ocean with words, but actually we need to come down to some practical, demonstrable evidence of what translation should look like. So we aligned with DRI, the Dementia Research Institute, and with the Dementia Research Institute, with the £28 million plus the charities that also contribute to that research in DRI, we have added £30 million to a translation fund and are actively helping make the science translate out of that institute. And there are other examples of that type of work. So we look for the originators of those science ideas. The real point of today and the point of LifeArc is to say translation is not a transaction. It's not just an early transaction. It's not doing one deal to extract an idea and then forever sort of lock it into a contractual setting that doesn't enable it to move forward. So LifeArc's got all the disciplines and functions within it in our around about 300 people who you used to find at the front end of pharma companies when they were really working on that interface with research teams. But the gap has widened between in-licensing and in-licensable scientific products and assets from where the science is. And there's lots of complex reasons why that's so, not least of which is the complexity of the biology to treat small, more discrete diseases in very defined patient populations. So LifeArc's approach with our skills, with our money, our advice, science and funding is to work with academics, work out what the opportunity might be for that science, and then to help using advanced science or funding. So we don't always form companies, but we do form companies through our early ventures team. Sometimes we just nurture a piece of science through along with the team until we actually see whether the potential is going to play out. And then we will help them downstream. So we have a vision downstream of what their partnership, what the uptake needs to look like. So I think LifeArc is representing a gap that's opened up. We absolutely work with patients at the front end, and that's been one of the joys and the difference of having been in a commercial setting as an R&D director and as LifeArc's CEO. We start with the patients. So we have 5 themes. We have the themes of neurology or neurodegeneration, global health, chronic respiratory infection, rare disease, and pediatric oncology. And we call them translational challenges. We'll put around about £100 million into these very, very big programs. They can adopt projects that come from any STEM science. So they can be devices, diagnostics, digital tech, and therapies. And we actually ask the patients what's needed so that we can actually give impact to patients today as well as the cure in the long term, if that's what's possible and doable. But ultimately that does take, as we've heard, some time. So with our translational challenges, we start with the patients. So we say we're informed by patients, and then we're guided by experts. So we get the knowledge, and then we build the ecosystem that will actually help us define the assets that we can deliver. And then those assets are, through the strategy we adopt and the partnerships we adopt, actually targeted into the economics and the economies that we have to go to. Not just the UK, that will be, because for our global health, we have to look for some of the more distant countries as well. But as Chaz said, some of their issues today in global health will come and haunt us in the future. So that's LifeArc, and we really need that convened ecosystem, which includes government, it includes everybody, and we don't intend to work alone. So we see ourselves as catalysts of the ecosystem that needs to deliver.
Thank you very much. Lots and lots of thoughts to get stuck in there, and I'm going to kick off by coming back to you, George. And one of the things you light on your remarks is about where our competitive advantage lies as a country here, because you mentioned we're obviously in this post-Brexit environment where we've had to rethink a lot of things about science and tech and also life science. If you think back to your era in the 1990s, the world is very different. The life sciences ecosystem is very different as well. If you were to think about where exactly we should focus that competitive advantage with regards to our sort of international competitors, where would it be?
Yes, I think about that about every 3 hours.
All right.
And that's my job, really. I mean, I bumped into a friend the other day at Bio in America who said, "Do you miss investing?" And I said, "Yes, I miss the fast-paced, agile, dynamic JDI culture. But I am responsible for investing about 40 billion of public money over this 3 years. And that is a big responsibility. And I don't think sometimes we tell the world what a major investor we are. Total amount of R&D in the UK economy, public R&D over this 3 years is 52 billion. That is a big number. It's not China's 240 billion or America's 180. But that's over 3 years. That's a lot of money. And I'm not sure we're getting the full private sector leverage off that we could and should. So, that keeps me awake at night, and that's part of all the reforms I'm looking at. So look, in the life science piece, I think the global question is really key, because we're in danger, I think, of becoming an extraordinary global laboratory, a research ecosystem par excellence in this new ecosystem. But the City of London not financing the companies, and the NHS not feeling it can afford to buy the products. And the American market, and that's really in the last few years, we've become a most brilliant incubator for NASDAQ. We've created hundreds of companies, and we've sold them, and congratulate ourselves that we've sold them to American crossover funds for sort of 100 million. And if anyone watches, they then floated back onto NASDAQ with 2 noughts on the end, often 3 months later. So we've been funding, I'm a great believer in NASDAQ, but we do have the City of London here. So we have a problem in that we've become the world's incubator, but we haven't been capturing enough of that value economically here.
And one thing about that is, of course, is equity pools in the City of London, which the Chancellor and the Treasury have been talking about with pension former funds. But I think getting better equity would help deal with that.
Totally. I think there are 2 big barriers if you look structurally at our life science economy. One is the city hasn't really been looking at this sector to finance it. But the other is the NHS has really struggled to be a puller through of innovation. And that's not to blame anybody, but it's because it's 470 organisations. It's not national. It's focused far too heavily on disease treatment in hospitals, blue light emergency, late-stage treatment. And that's a function of decades of its structure, which multiple political parties have tried to grapple with. So I think unless we can create some sort of markets uptake, pull-through runway, we're in danger of more and more money coming into research. And that's key. But the global health challenges that Chaz spoke to, and the world needs very quickly to develop new ways of preventing pandemics, new ways of preventing public health across the emerging economies. I've just got back from India. The China market is huge. If we're not careful, the India, China, Southeast Asia market and the American markets will grow and eventually merge. And the UK is in danger of being outside of the European single market, neither in those blocks, but a research headquarters. And I think the opportunity for us, which I do think is real, is to grip the regulatory pathways into these new sectors. So the immunotherapies, the new extraordinary breakthroughs that are coming, we're within, we've got vaccines for cancer. And that totally transforms the procurement pathway. And we can start to use genomics to identify which people we should be giving the cancer vaccine to and how much that saves the system. And then we could change the procurement from the traditional NHS sort of tin hats 5-year negotiation round with pharma, here come the salesman, into a conversation about, hang on, this is value for the UK economy. The pandemic showed us the cost of disease and the value of health. You can't do this overnight, but in some disease areas, that's why we've set up these missions, you can start to use smart digital infrastructure, early patient uptake, in key diseases like dementia where there isn't a solution, or in cancer where we've got the chance to treat very differently, and write the rule book for the world, actually, on how you do smart, nice pathways into smart MHRA regulatory pathways, into smart NHS procurement pathways. That's the big challenge, and I think if we grip it, we could make sure that NHS patients benefit hugely without us having to pay top dollar for the latest drugs. We get access to the latest drugs because we're the world's test bed. So we need to shift, I think, up from being the world's laboratory to the world's test bed. And I think like LifeArc and a number of other projects like it are key because they're creating the infrastructure where patients come first. So I think we've got a big opportunity to grip that. We can move much more quickly than Europe. And across the European market, people look at the Brits and say, you guys have led the way on cell and gene therapies, on mRNA, on the pandemic, the clinical trials, the data bit. If we grip it, we could be the lit runway into the European market and our own patients benefit.
Thank you very much. And that takes me on to the question that I wanted to put to you, Chaz, here, when we're talking about, these big challenges, which are obviously, I think, we're all aware of and are hoping that science and life sciences will be something of a light towards trying to get through some of them in the best way that we possibly can. But to George's point here about the pathways of trying to make actual change from them, because you talked about how the culture at Oxford has changed. And I think it's remarkable, you know, if you think about even 20, 30 years ago from where it was then as a very sort of wholly academic into an institution that now plays a role in creating commercial operations. Where do you see the challenges of taking those innovations to direct change here at home with regards to what George was saying, thinking about the NHS and other parts of the public realm?
So maybe I'll answer that in two ways. I mean, something I still worry about in Oxford is that some of our smartest kids, they go off to the US because there's lots more funding available, lots more risk capital, and then they never come back. And you know, we're creating all these companies. I'm surrounded by amazing talent. I'm always thinking to myself, you know, who is the next Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk? Because, you know, frankly, individuals change the world. You know, these individuals, they've not just created a company, they've created new industries. They've created hundreds of thousands of jobs. They've created lots of millionaires, and they've created quite a few billionaires. You know, I'm a little envious of Stanford because on the doorstep of Stanford, there's half a dozen companies worth more than $1 trillion. Apple is 3, Microsoft 2.5, Alphabet, Google about 1.5, Amazon 1.3, Nvidia 1, Tesla 0.8. In Europe, I don't think we have any company that's worth $1 trillion. Can you imagine if we had one of those companies in the UK, the impact it would have on our economy, the jobs, et cetera, et cetera?
We sort of had one with ARM before, to George's point about how that got listed, and that's one that could have turned out very differently.
George's point is well made. I think the second comment I would make is that we have to think completely global. You know, you all saw what Oxford did in the pandemic. You know, to me, it's amazing how the whole university came together, all 4 corners of it, all disciplines working on vaccines, repurposing drugs, diagnostics, mask wearing, ventilators, etc., etc. But the most important thing we did, and I take no credit for this, is down to the genius of John Bell and Louise Richardson. But my colleagues, what they did was they worked with government, UK government, they worked with UK regulators, they worked with funders, Wellcome, Gates, and importantly, they worked with AstraZeneca. And they came together and they created a single vision, a single focus, a single goal. We want to get a vaccine for COVID-19 as quickly as possible. And what they did in 9 months, something that normally would take 9 years. Now, I think that's the sort of urgency we need to inject into some of these missions. You know, this Alzheimer's drug that we're very excited about in the last few days from Lilly, you know, that finding, that genetic association, that linkage, there was a paper in 1984. It's taken us nearly 4 decades to translate. You know, we don't have 4 decades to tackle many of these problems, etc. So I think we have to think international. I mean, even with the vaccine story, you know, Oxford had to work with AstraZeneca. We didn't have the manufacturing capability. We didn't have the ability to distribute vaccines. We didn't have the ability to make 3 billion samples of it. You know, we worked with the Serum Research Institute, etc. And all these trillion-dollar companies in Stanford, they are completely international. And I think if, you know, as we get more successes, you know, and we get that density, that critical mass, loads of entrepreneurs, loads of innovators, loads of leaders, industry will pile in. It'll come.
Thank you. Bethan, one of the things that you raised, and I would like to put in a comment here that Melanie made as well, you said that, you know, some of the doom-mongering about the UK trying to compete with Silicon Valley is maybe a little bit overdone. There obviously still are some challenges in terms of where the UK sits and where it should be. And, you know, obviously there's been a lot of debate and discussion about the Oxford-Cambridge arc and where there needs to be much more infrastructure and transport and houses to make that an appealing place. What sort of stuff would you like to see to make sure that the UK sector is as competitive as it can be?
Well, I mean, I think it's not my place to strictly make policy recommendations as a reporter.
Please, you're welcome.
The same things come up again and again, and talent is absolutely crucial. Obviously, as you mentioned, we do have a great talent pipeline, but there are big problems with visas and the attractiveness of the UK as a destination for global talent. The numbers coming in for things like masters from the EU are really, really worrying. This is, there are people kind of raising alarm bells on this because these are the individuals who, traditionally would be setting up scientific kind of projects and being involved in this stuff. So that's crucial. Lab space, both in the arc and the kind of golden triangle and outside of it. I think we don't kind of need to focus entirely on the arc. Obviously, that's crucial, but there's great stuff going on elsewhere. I spoke to an investment manager working in the north of England, and he said that the biggest problem for investment and the greatest obstacle is trains. That if we don't set up the rail network in a way that actually connects the key cities and enables people to kind of move around, then we're not going to get it right. So it's really these kind of basic things which I can make a massive difference.
Thank you. And then finally, Melanie, before we're going to throw it out to questions on the floor, from your experience, have you got some examples of some specific partnerships or initiatives that have bridged this gap here? And what are the kind of lessons you've taken away from those that could apply elsewhere?
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, we certainly do have examples in that as I said, the old life arc humanized antibodies that got the technology from MRC and then actually offered that technology to others, and that's how we have our royalty stream from Keytruda. But also lecanemab is there sitting just FDA approved for early dementia, also one of LifeArc's contributions into the sector. And then another one is just building on the COVID collaboration, which was talked about often, but is absolutely instrumental. That behaviour of collaboration across sectors, instrumental. We've got to keep hold of that and see it again. An example builds on Oxford, where LifeArc founded RQ-Bio. RQ-Bio was founded from within LifeArc, but licensing antibodies against COVID from Oxford, and that was built on LifeArc's antibody expertise. So it was very easy for us, and we had students in the lab, and we love students, so talent and propagating talent's really important. During the pandemic, working on really assessing the potential to have antibody therapies or preventative therapies against COVID. So now RQ-Bio has licensed more antibodies into AstraZeneca. So you get both the prevention, the vaccine side, and now the sort of keeping the vulnerable safe side. So again, another multidisciplinary collaboration across sectors. That's got to happen. And the one that I really want to see is a bit of a plea to the academic sector on whom we depend for the innovations, is not to be divisive between the STEM sciences. I'd love to see more cross STEM sciences collaboration, because I believe that to get diagnostics, to really empower patients with information, with digital tech and stuff like that, and actually sometimes even to support them through their therapeutic regimes, we've seen that digitech is helpful. We need them to start working together even earlier. We will encourage it, but even investors are struggling because they see a diagnostics company and a device company and a therapeutics company very differently. So one of our contributions is to see in a not-for-profit, without that commercial need to deliver on a monthly basis at this stage, we can actually test what good looks like as a collaboration.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Let's open this out to questions. I'm going to try and take them in threes to get as many as possible. We'll start with the lady at the back, and then the lady here, and the gentleman here. So get you on your toes here. Yes. And just remind me to say who you are and where you're from. Oh, is that on? No. No, we might having to shout, and I'll have to replicate this with people streaming online. Yeah, should we try and shout? Yes. Mhm. Thank you very much. And then we now have the lady here, please. And have we got working microphones? No. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Can we try and get those working, please?
Louise Wren from the Association of Medical Research Charities. I promise we did not plan this. It's wonderful to hear, Minister, your comments about putting patients and charities at the heart of translation. I'm really keen to follow up with you and others about how we deliver that in practice. Also really interested to hear the panel's comments about bringing different sectors closer together, not least hospitals, universities and industry. And I wonder if you had any thoughts on how we deliver that in practice, and particularly how we incentivise and support careers that span those sectors so people can dip in and dip out.
Great. Thank you. And finally, gentleman here, please.
Thanks. Robin Lisson from the magazine Research Fortnight. Question for George, really. You talked about picking areas, and I know that DCIT has a kind of R&D clusters agenda, so it'd be good to find out a bit more about that, and maybe some details on, once you've identified a cluster that you want to support, what that actually means and what supports there.
Thank you very much. I feel slightly they're all sort of for you in a way, George. Those questions. I will try and get some others to go
I
elsewhere.
think James is probably more for
Yeah.
Mel. Do you want me to pick up the?
Do you want
first
me to
bit?
pick up on
Yeah.
the first two on different sectors and clusters, please? Collaboration with different sectors and clusters.
Yeah. So, Louise, as you probably know, this is my. It's a chosen specialised subject, and it's wonderful to see two charity voices here. And it's not just a fluffy point that we want to support the charities. We have in this new landscape, genomics and informatics mean patient consent becomes completely key. I can tell you, having been the first Minister for Digital Health and the Minister for try and sort out care.data, the finest minds in Whitehall will not be able to give themselves permission to the extent that we need for patients to be engaged in medicine. The only people who will be able to do that are, guess what, the patients. And that's why one of the reasons I'm so passionate about putting patient voice and charities, because patients won't want to and will never let pharma speak to patients. They'll do it through charities. And if the charities are able to say to industry, look, don't know if it's of interest, but we've got 500,000 patients. They're all signed up. They're on our sharing their medical record with us. They're sliding the consent bar, enroll me in trials. That suddenly makes the charities very powerful in the new landscape. And we've seen it in a number of different ways. So I'm a huge supporter. I'm no longer the Minister for Life Science in the Department of Health, but Will Quince, my colleague, and I work closely together. And the answer to your question, how, is really through these missions, these 8 chronic disease missions. The whole point of these is to get away from an ecosystem where you tip money into research over here and sort of wait for the NHS to be able to pull through. And you create, these missions are integrated, NHS, NIHR, MHRA, research, industry, patients missions, and they're all led by co-chairs, one of whom is an inspired patient advocate. So we're trying to put the patient voice right in the heart of those. So that would be my best answer right now to where we see the cutting edge of that pull through. You make a good point about careers, and I think there are two career structures in this landscape we need to do more to support. One is, to Chaz's point, the entrepreneurial scientists. The scientists I meet today, most of them say, I want to start a company, not actually to make money, to change the world, because they want to go and they've seen that if you start a company, that's the best way to get your research into the transformational space. And we haven't really, and I say this as Minister for Research and University Funding, the career path, if you want to be an entrepreneurial, world-changing scientist, we make it really difficult for you. And one of the things I'm looking at through both the Horizon Pioneer ecosystem reform is, couldn't we create some sort of fellowship path for students who want to be both academics and brilliant world changers, because it's not there. And the other one is in translational research, are clinical trials research nurses, informaticians, researchers. To me, they are the golden thread of the UK life science model, and I'd like to badge them all UK Translational Special Forces, the world's most prestigious translational research. And if you say you're on the NIHR translational research career path, people acknowledge it, and it's a huge training opportunity for us. And a lot of our very expensive translational facilities are half empty because we haven't got the staff. Well, why don't we train the world's best people, therefore give us capacity and get more into that space? Robin, on clusters, the big drive that I'm pushing in the new department is that the innovation economy doesn't exist waiting for government announcements. Important though they are, actually innovation economies take shape in places. It's people in places taking risks, and the clusters are key to the innovation economy. Oxford, Cambridge, actually London, take out the shops. We've got 3 huge clusters around UCL and King's and Imperial and much besides, and all around the country, up in Manchester, in Leeds, in Sheffield, in Newcastle, in Glasgow, in Edinburgh. So what I'm trying to do is pull together all the various bits of work that have been done across government. This autumn, we're going to be setting out an interactive digital cluster heat map of the R&D economy. It's a very tough bit of work because it means government thinking about places, not its own silos of announcements. So there's a lot of work going on now. And what I hope it'll allow us to do, Robin, is to see which ones are growing fastest, why, which ones are slowing down, why, and what the actual intervention required is. In some clusters, it might be there's a lack of skills. In some, we may not just be haven't built the B452 bypass. In some, it might be there isn't a public anchor laboratory. But then we can start to target interventions much better to really help those clusters grow. And one of my answers to Minister, how are you going to grow the UK innovation economy quicker than we have traditionally, is focus much more on the places in which this is really happening and unlock the barriers for them and support them better, rather than announce in London and let them run around and work out which pipe the money's coming out of. I think that'll help us to drive this revolution forward much more quickly.
Thank you very much. And Melanie, just to come back on that first question quick, because I would like to get one more round of questions in before we head off about the point that was raised about high-risk impact investing.
Yeah, certain charities hugely important, and I think they're unsung heroes. And actually, when you look at what AMRC pulled together, that is a very powerful group. I was talking yesterday; it's about 220 plus charities, and an enormous amount of investment goes into that early research. And so that's why we often have a sort of advice service with charities in Life Art, where we really look at what they've invested and try and help them focus with a translation mindset, because they very quickly want to get benefit because they're talking to the patients, they're answerable to their patients. We also find that they're wonderful conveners for us to pull patients in who will think big about what's needed to help them. And you can just see the power of patient advocacy. They're going to be empowered. I don't care what anybody says about oh, well, you don't want to diagnose people too early, blah, blah, blah. Listen to the patients. The new generation of patients want to know about their health, their prospects, their risk factors, their prevention opportunities, communities they can join. So it's hugely important that we nurture the charity sector and the patient interaction.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much. We have now got working microphone, which is great. So I'm going to take 3 questions. Can I please ask you to keep them brief so we get as many as possible? We're going to go for the gentleman here, please, and then the lady and the gentleman here. Thank you. This is the gentleman here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is James Bain. I'm a PhD student. I'll be back in the lab after this. But I also run a student-led nonprofit here in the UK called Nucleates, which was started in the US and is now grown internationally. And we are, I think, kind of symbolic of what George was saying, what Chaz was saying about this new energy in the university ecosystems, which is really about building lasting, sustainable, founder-led biotech and life science companies. And one of the things that we see, we've worked with 9 companies from Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, the LMB, Cambridge over the last year. And we see incredible scientists, postdocs, PhD students who've invented some incredible new science and want to turn it into a company, which I think is one of the best things that you could possibly hope for. And we see an incredible amount of capital, international capital behind this. We've managed to allocate 1.6 million from
I'm just going to get to your question, please.
So the question is, how is the government working with universities? What areas does it see where it can push these ecosystems to become more open and become more founder-led and enable scientists to create their own companies?
Thank you very much. Question here, please.
Thank you. That's a great question. My name is Anushka Sharma. I'm from the Space Academic Network. And my question is, do we need new business and finance models? I'm thinking about Web3, decentralized autonomous organizations or DAOs. And is this a way to have measurable impact with UKRI that are outcome-focused and feeds back into universities that have supported this decade's structure of research?
Great question. Thank you. And finally, the gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Wei-Wan Li from the charity Action Against Age-Related Macular Degeneration. So bringing back, George previously mentioned the concept of philantropharma, which I love it. But of course, taking a page from life are huge initiatives. How can we actually get smaller charities, like some of our colleagues here, to engage more like a charity tech level, right? Smaller, quick, nimble, almost mission-driven. So in the UK, we have now ARIA. But can we actually think about somewhat of the DARPA mission-driven, that the charity-led and use some of the ARIA instruments? Is that a possibility?
Thank you very much. Right, Chaz, I'd like to start that question there about the ecosystem with universities as well. So from your perspective, how do you see engagement with government where it could be better?
As an academic, we all like to whinge about money and we want more money, etc. And of course, more money will accelerate this. But one thing I would say, and I'm sitting here thinking, we expect government to do everything. And, the examples I gave with sort of Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg or whatever, it wasn't the government that did it. So I think I agree with focusing on patients, but I absolutely believe that the solutions to some of these big problems are in the brains and the hands of some of these great young leaders, innovators and entrepreneurs. Those are the people we need to target, support, help, enable, because they're going to change the world. They really are. They've got the energy, they understand it. I don't understand AI like some of these kids do. And, frankly, AI, my worry is China is miles ahead. And the only companies that even can compete with China are on the West Coast. Stephen Schwarzman, who gave a lot of money to Oxford, 192 million for our humanities building, he said, you guys in Europe have lost the race already.
Yeah. Thank you. Again, a nice positive note. Bethan, just on this point about business and finance models, do you have any reflections on that?
Yeah, I think that the answer is yes. There's obviously already lots of great work going on thinking about ways to do this. So at various different universities, and they're all kind of different models, but we've got kind of Gritstone in the north of England, which is a collaboration between different universities, OSI and other kind of models which are funneling investment into spin-out companies at the point at which where there are funding gaps. So identifying where the gaps are and getting investment. I'm going to use perhaps some what a hated phrase, patient capital, and making sure that money gets in. I think there is also work to be done in making those models more effective and connecting them properly with the investment communities. And their job basically is bridging the gap between the science stuff and the investment communities, which don't often talk to each other and don't really speak each other's language. So that's the work that's being done, and it needs to be done more, basically.
Exactly, except when they're in a room brought together by Onward. Melanie, Fanny, and this point about engaging smaller charities, what's your view on that from the gentleman's question?
If I understand it, it's to actually engage them so that they can actually be involved much more in a...
Like creating biotech level kind of shot on solving problems.
Okay, so Life Arc would be you need a sort of facilitator for that, because you need so we've got our early investment team, and the early ventures investment team will use scientists in a broader community to sort of inform us about what the opportunity is around a diligence opportunity that we might then go and invest in. So I suspect if we actually make those links stronger, that's where you might get really fortunate about that. The final question, though, that I also thought was really interesting was the business model change. I think the business model change has to be enormous. I think, and I'm not as afraid about all the hype about China and the West Coast and all the AI and tech, because I actually believe, and I've been to China with my colleague over there, and we've had a look. It's tech for tech's sake. It's not tech that's integrated into medicine and how we're going to apply it and how you don't kill people when you deliver something into their bodies. So let's not give up. Let's not be negative about the need for science to prove itself person to person. And when it comes to business models, yes, we're going to have to change the business models. And big pharma are very aware, I think, of that. But the other thing that we must all hold on to is medicine is going so that advanced therapies can cure disease, once in a lifetime, innovation sometimes. And those business models, new business models will emerge, and they might also, if you're doing it on a rare disease, impact chronic disease. So do the science, get the work out there, and I have a belief that the financial world and business world will find a way subsequently.
Now, George, we're out of time here, but I don't know, in 60 seconds, if you've got any final reflections, and if you don't, then that's fine.
Yeah, very quickly, it's happening. So on the business model is changing right now, and I think the cost of disease and the value of health and the econometrics, place-based disease cohorts is where it's at. And I think if we can, we've set up through the life science missions those 8 chronic disease areas, which are there to break down the pathways and define the new pathways in. And the business model is moving from the old model I described of one-size-fits-all drug procured through tin-helmeted NHS versus industry to an agile digital model of population health economics. But we haven't yet got the digitalized health economic infrastructure there. It's coming. From the philanthropy pharma charity check point of view, honestly, industry is desperate. And my advice would be look at what some charities have done, get the AMRC together, get together with groups like Life Arc, get on the front foot and pick up the phone to industry. You'll be amazed by the appetite. And I think on the university side, honestly, I think the things are, it's not perfect, but that sector is generating extraordinary levels of spin-outs and activity. My real focus is on how we get the market to pull it through better, finance it here in the UK better, and adopt it in our health innovation system better. Or else we'll end up with these wonderful companies that Chas and Oxford are growing, floating on NASDAQ in 7 years, and our health innovation ecosystem is nurturing the research but not actually pulling it through. And I think the health economics, the charities, the patient voice, tackling disease in the West Midlands, in Manchester, in the big conurbations where it's costing everyone a fortune, and the Treasury have put a number on what it's costing, that gives you a handle into a new business model of health economics 2.0.
Brilliant. Absolutely. Thank you very much, George. That's great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along today, and thanks for some brilliant questions. I think when you look at the themes that we've talked about, it's very clear about the direction of travel we need to be going there. And there's a lot of wider questions that can go beyond just life sciences, about the UK, about its equity pools, about making sure we've got the right ecosystem, the right regulation, and the right dialogue with universities. But I'd like to all put your hands together to please thank Melanie, George, Bethan, and Chaz for their time today. And thank you all